And it's hitting me. It's hitting me so hard. And they keep giving him time.
Mika Fortson has spent the last 2 years traveling from Atlanta to Fort Walton Beach, fighting for justice for her son, Senior Airman Roger Fortson. In May of 2024, then Deputy Eddie Duran was responding to a domestic disturbance call at Fortson's apartment complex, a call that was later proven to be false. Duran's body camera video shows Fortson opening the door with a gun pointed at the ground before Duran opened fire, shooting Fortson multiple times within seconds.
He opened his own front door. 3.4 seconds later, he had been shot 5 times. Roger Fortson was not running from police. He was not attacking anyone. He was not holding a woman hostage inside that apartment. He was home, alone, on FaceTime with his girlfriend. But outside his door stood Deputy Eddie Duran, responding to a report that had already passed through several people before it ever reached him. And by the time that information arrived, uncertain sounds from an apartment had somehow become a physical domestic disturbance in progress. There was just one problem. There was no domestic disturbance. Roger looked through the peephole, but he could not see anyone standing outside. So when the knocking continued, he grabbed his legally owned handgun and opened the door with the weapon pointed toward the floor. The gun never came up. Roger never fired. He never aimed it at the deputy. And he was never told to drop it before Duran pulled the trigger. 5 shots. Roger fell backwards into his apartment. Then came the command about the gun, after the bullets had already struck him. As Roger lay wounded, he told the deputy the weapon was no longer with him. Moments later, he said he could not breathe. When officers finally entered the apartment, they found no injured woman, no frightened child, no second person at all. Only Roger. In this episode, we are going through the report that sent a deputy to apartment 1401, what Roger's girlfriend heard during that final FaceTime call, why he could not see who was knocking, what the body camera recording revealed, why the sheriff later fired Duran, and why Duran's lawyers are now fighting to keep this case away from a jury. Subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories, because the first version of this shooting left out the details that changed everything. Roger Nagali Fortson was only 23, but the people closest to him already saw him as the one who would carry the family forward. He was the eldest of several siblings, a senior airman in the United States Air Force, and a special missions aviator stationed at Hurlburt Field in Florida. At home, though, rank was not what defined him. His family called him Mr. Make It Happen, because whenever something needed to be done, Roger found a way. His mother, Chantameki Mecca Fortson, spoke of him as more than a son. He was someone she leaned on, someone who encouraged her, and someone who believed his military career could improve life for the entire family. He was especially close to his younger siblings. 2 days before he died, Roger called home to ask what his little sister wanted for her upcoming 10th birthday. That was the kind of detail his family held on to afterward. Even while building his own future, he was still making plans for theirs. Roger joined the Air Force in 2019. He went on to serve aboard the AC-130J Ghost Rider and later deployed to Southwest Asia, taking part in missions connected to operations over Iraq and Syria. His service earned him an Air Medal with a combat device. Roger had survived dangerous military operations overseas. But on May 3, 2024, the danger that ended his life came directly to the front door of his own Florida apartment. Friday, May 3, 2024, did not begin like the kind of day anyone would later study frame by frame. Roger Fortson was inside apartment 1401 at the Shea Elon apartment complex in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. The complex sat roughly 8 miles from Hurlburt Field, where he served in the United States Air Force. He lived in that apartment alone with his dog, and that afternoon, nothing inside suggested an emergency. Roger was on FaceTime with his girlfriend. She was not in Florida with him. Their relationship was long distance, so video calls had become part of the way they stayed close. That afternoon, they were discussing their plans for the upcoming Cinco de Mayo weekend. It was the sort of ordinary conversation couples have when they are looking ahead to a few days together. Nothing about the call suggested that either of them believed Roger was in danger. To them, this was simply another Friday afternoon. There was no woman inside the apartment being assaulted. There was no child hiding in another room. There was no partner arguing with Roger face to face. And there was no one inside apartment 1401 asking the police to come. Roger and his girlfriend believed they were having a private conversation. But elsewhere in the building, Another resident thought she was hearing something disturbing through the apartment complex. She could hear a male voice. She could hear movement. And she believed there might be an argument taking place in the apartment above her. What she could not hear was a second person responding. She could not see what was happening. She had never met Roger. Yet those uncertain sounds were enough to set a chain of events in motion. This is where the story splits into two completely different versions of the same afternoon. Inside apartment 1401, Roger was speaking to his girlfriend and making weekend plans. Outside that apartment, people who could not see him, did not know him, and had not spoken to him were beginning to describe a possible emergency. And with every person that information passed through, the situation became more serious. Roger still had no idea that a stranger's interpretation of sounds through the building was already bringing law enforcement to his door. The first person in this chain did not see anyone being attacked. She did not see Roger Fortson with a woman. She did not hear a woman screaming for help. She had never even met him. What she had were sounds. A resident in the complex believed noise was traveling through an air conditioning vent from the apartment above her. She heard a male voice. She heard footsteps. She heard movement that she interpreted as scuffling. At one point, she believed the man might have been saying he was tired of someone lying to him. But there was one detail she could not explain. She never heard another person answer. Still, she began filling in the blanks. She assumed a woman might be inside because she had heard a female voice from that apartment on an earlier occasion. She also believed she had once heard a child. Investigators later considered whether some of the sounds she thought came from a child may actually have come from Roger's dog. That is how uncertain this information was from the beginning. It was not a direct eyewitness account. It was not a plea from someone in danger. It was one resident trying to make sense of noises she could not see. The resident did not call Roger. She did not knock on his door. She did not contact the sheriff's office directly. Instead, she reached out to the leasing office. Now watch how the story traveled. The neighbor described what she thought she heard to a leasing employee. The leasing employee then contacted the sheriff's office. Dispatch received that account and relayed it to Deputy Eddie Duran. By the time Duran heard it, he was not being sent to investigate unexplained sounds in an apartment building. He was being sent to a possible physical domestic disturbance in progress. That difference matters. No victim had called 911. Nobody inside apartment 1401 had asked for help. No witness had seen Roger strike anyone. No one had confirmed that a woman was even inside the apartment. Yet the description arriving through dispatch carried the weight of an active assault. The sheriff's own records later described the report as fourth-party information. The original resident, the leasing employee, dispatch, and finally Duran. At every stage, the deputy became further removed from the person who had actually heard the sounds. He was responding to an interpretation of an interpretation. After the shooting, Roger's family initially believed Duran had gone to the wrong apartment. That claim spread quickly because the facts inside apartment 1401 did not match the emergency police said they were responding to. The official investigation later clarified the address issue. Dispatch gave Duran apartment 1401. When he arrived at the complex, the leasing employee repeated apartment 1401. So Duran did go to the numbered unit he had been directed to. But that does not mean the report connected to that apartment was accurate. The alleged domestic attack was unfounded. Roger was alone. There was no woman being beaten, no child in danger, and no hidden victim waiting for rescue. The apartment number matched. The emergency did not. And when Duran reached the 4th floor and stood outside Roger Fortson's door, he encountered something that should have changed the entire response. Silence. The man standing outside apartment 1401 was Deputy Eddie Duran. He was not new to uniforms or high-pressure situations. Duran had served in the United States Army, deployed to Iraq, and later worked in civilian law enforcement. He first joined the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office in 2019, left in 2021, and returned in 2023. His employment record also contained incidents that would later come under scrutiny. While serving as a school resource officer, Duran received an 8-day unpaid suspension connected to delayed offender checks and insubordination. Then, 4 days before Roger Fortson was killed, Duran submitted notice that he intended either to resign or move into part-time work because of family difficulties. None of that by itself proves criminal guilt. But after the shooting, every part of his record became relevant to questions about his judgment, supervision, and decision-making. Shortly before 4:30 p.m. on May 3rd, Duran arrived at the Shea Elon apartment complex. Another deputy was also responding, but Duran did not wait. He went up to the 4th floor alone and stopped outside apartment 1401. Remember what he had been told. A possible physical domestic disturbance was taking place inside. So what did he hear? No clear argument. No screaming. No woman asking for help. No sounds confirming that anyone was being attacked. The hallway was quiet. That silence did not prove nothing had happened, but it gave Duran no immediate confirmation of the violent emergency described over dispatch. Still, he moved forward without waiting for the second deputy to reach the door. At about 4:31 p.m., Duran knocked on Roger's door. During that first knock, he did not identify himself as law enforcement. He then moved away from the direct view of the doorway. Inside, Roger was still connected to his girlfriend on FaceTime. They did not hear anyone announce that the sheriff's office was outside. Roger asked who was at the door. No answer reached him. He looked through the peephole. He could not see anyone standing there. Now the situation inside that apartment had changed. Roger did not know whether the person outside was a neighbor, a stranger, or someone who intended to force his way in. As the knocking became louder, Roger told his girlfriend he was going to get his gun. That handgun was legally owned. Roger was inside his own residence. And at that moment, he had no confirmed knowledge that a deputy was standing outside. Reaching for the weapon placed him in serious danger, but it did not prove he intended to threaten or attack anyone. From Roger's position, someone he could not identify was pounding on his door while remaining outside the peephole's view. Duran knocked again and then announced, "Sheriff's office, open the door." His body camera recorded the announcement, but Roger and his girlfriend apparently did not hear it. Seconds later, the lock moved. The door began to open.
Sheriff's office, open the door! Sheriff's office, open the door! Step back. Drop the gun! Drop the gun! Drop the gun! 312, shots fired. Suspect down. Do not move! 312, hit EMS my location.
Inside, Roger was still connected to his girlfriend. Outside, Duran was waiting for a possible attacker, even though he had heard no confirmed violence from within. Deputy Eddie Duran stood just outside, his body camera recording every movement. As Roger Fortson came into view, Duran said, "Step back." Roger was holding his handgun in his right hand. It was down at his side, pointed toward the floor. His left hand started to rise, his palm facing outward. Then came the moment this entire case would be judged on. According to the sheriff's internal review, Duran's own weapon appeared before Roger's handgun was fully visible. Roger's gun did not rise. It did not turn toward the deputy. It remained pointed down. The angle mattered. Investigators later noted that Duran could see the rear portion of the gun's sight because the weapon was tilted toward the floor. That detail helped show where the muzzle was directed. Roger did not point the gun at Duran. He did not fire. He did not lunge. He did not make what the internal investigation described as a hostile movement. The door had barely finished opening when Duran fired. 3.4 seconds. That was the distance between Roger beginning to open his front door and 5 gunshots tearing through the doorway. Roger started falling backward almost immediately. And listen closely to the order of events, because this became one of the most important facts in the entire investigation. Duran did not tell Roger to drop the gun before he opened fire. The command about the weapon came after the shots. By then, Roger was already on the floor inside his apartment. The gun was no longer in his hand. Roger told Duran, "I don't have it." Moments later, he said he could not breathe. The deputy who had arrived expecting a possible physical domestic disturbance was now standing over a wounded man. But the reported victim still had not appeared. There was no woman screaming from another room. No child came running out. No one inside asked the deputies for protection. Additional officers reached the apartment and moved in to clear it. Only then did they confirm what Roger's girlfriend already knew from the FaceTime call. Roger had been alone. There was no second person inside apartment 1401. No assault victim. No hidden attacker. No domestic confrontation for the deputies to interrupt. The emergency that had brought Duran to the fourth floor did not exist. What did exist was a 23-year-old airman lying wounded in his own home after opening the door with a legally owned firearm pointed down. The deputies began rendering medical aid. Roger was taken from the apartment and transported to a hospital, but the 5 shots had caused fatal injuries. Roger Fortson died that day. Afterward, Duran gave investigators his explanation for why he fired. He said he believed Roger stepped toward him. He said he saw aggression in Roger's expression. He also said the narrow apartment breezeway left him with no realistic place to move away from the threat he believed he was facing. In Duran's account, the moment became him or me. That is the defense at the center of the criminal case. A deputy responding to a reported act of domestic violence suddenly saw a man open the door holding a gun and believed he had to act immediately to protect his own life. But the sheriff's internal investigation reached a sharply different conclusion about Roger's actions. The review found that Roger did not point the weapon at Duran. He did not raise it. He did not fire it. He did not make an aggressive movement that investigators believed justified deadly force. That conflict matters because the question is not simply whether Roger had a gun. He did. The question is what he was doing with it during those few seconds. Was the sight of a firearm enough to create an immediate threat? Or should the deputy have recognized that the weapon remained down and issued a command before firing? The body camera recording preserved that question in a way no later statement could erase. It showed Roger opening the door. It showed the position of the handgun. It showed his left hand rising. It captured the gunshots. And it recorded the command about the weapon coming only after Roger had already been struck. The entire shooting unfolded in seconds, but almost every part of those seconds would later be argued over. The direction of the gun, Roger's movement, Duran's position in the breezeway, the absence of a warning, and the deputy's claim that he believed he had no other option. The bullets came quickly. The explanations did not. Once the body camera recording became central to the investigation, the question was no longer simply whether Roger Fortson had a gun. What they found did not support the impression that Roger had raised the weapon or aimed it at the deputy. His handgun remained pointed toward the floor. He never pointed it at Duran. He never fired. He did not make what investigators classified as a hostile movement. The review also noted the angle of the gun. Because it was directed downward, Duran could see the rear portion of the weapon's sight. That detail became important because it helped establish that the muzzle was not directed at him. Investigators then examined the timing of the shots and the command concerning the gun. The order to drop the weapon did not come before Duran fired. It came afterward. By that point, Roger had already been struck and was falling backward into his apartment. As public scrutiny intensified, the focus shifted away from the mere presence of the firearm. People wanted to know whether Roger had created a threat and whether Duran had given him an opportunity to comply before using deadly force. The Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office ultimately concluded that Duran's use of deadly force was not objectively reasonable under department policy. On May 31, 2024, Sheriff Eric Aden fired him. The sheriff acknowledged that Roger had committed no crime. He also stated that the shooting should not have happened. That conclusion stood in sharp contrast to the implications of the first account. At first, the story was about a deputy facing an armed man. After the internal review, the same agency concluded that the armed man had not pointed the gun, had not fired, and had not made a threatening movement. That is why the body camera mattered. It prevented the encounter from being reduced to a few selective words. It showed the position of the gun, the speed of the shooting, and the fact that Roger received no command to drop the weapon before the shots. But Duran's termination was only an employment decision. It did not make him criminally guilty. The internal investigation determined that he had violated department policy, but prosecutors had to decide whether his actions also violated Florida law. That required a legal judgment under a higher standard. That decision would not come immediately. For several more months, Roger's family waited to learn whether losing a badge would be the only consequence, or whether Eddie Duran would eventually have to answer to a criminal charge. For nearly 3 months after Eddie Duran was fired, one question remained unanswered. Would the shooting remain a department policy failure, or would prosecutors treat it as a crime? On August 23, 2024, the answer came. Florida prosecutors charged Duran with manslaughter with a firearm, a first-degree felony carrying a possible sentence of up to 30 years in prison. The charge was significant, but it was not an accusation of premeditated murder. Prosecutors would not have to prove that Duran arrived at apartment 1401 intending to kill Roger Fortson. A manslaughter case instead focuses on whether his actions unlawfully caused Roger's death without the legal justification required for deadly force. Several days after the charge was announced, Duran was arrested. A judge initially refused to release him. He was later granted a $100,000 bond while the case moved through the court system. Duran pleaded not guilty. From the beginning, his defense has maintained that the shooting was lawful. His lawyers argue that he had been sent to investigate a possible act of domestic violence, that Roger opened the door holding a handgun, and that Duran reasonably believed he faced an immediate threat to his life. Their position is that Florida's self-defense law protected his decision to fire. That argument now reaches beyond what a jury might decide at trial. Duran's legal team has requested immunity from prosecution, meaning they want the judge to rule that the shooting was legally justified before the case ever reaches a jury. Under that argument, if Duran acted in lawful self-defense, he should not be forced to stand trial at all. An immunity hearing was scheduled for early August 2026. That hearing could decide the direction of the entire case. If the judge grants immunity, the manslaughter charge could be dismissed without a trial. If immunity is denied, Duran is expected to face a jury. Judge William Stone scheduled the trial to begin on September 28, 2026, provided the immunity request does not end the prosecution first. And that is where the case stands. Eddie Duran has not been convicted. He has not been acquitted. He remains charged, and he continues to deny criminal responsibility for Roger Fortson's death. The legal dispute now comes down to a narrow but critical question. Was the sight of a gun in Roger's hand enough to give Duran a reasonable belief that deadly force was immediately necessary? Or does the direction of that gun change everything? Roger's weapon remained pointed toward the floor. He did not raise it, aim it, fire it, or make the hostile movement described in the department's own review. The court must now decide whether those facts should be weighed by a jury, or whether Duran's claim of self-defense should prevent a trial from happening at all.
It's getting emotional because I feel like if he would have gave my baby 3 seconds of the time that they keep giving him, that Roger would still be here. If he had had a conversation with Roger, he would still be here.
Monday's court appearance was a pretrial conference where attorneys on both sides continued working through motions, including disputes over witnesses. Judge William Stone urged the attorneys to stay on schedule.
You're going to need to get them filed quickly so we can get them set. And no delays, because I'm not gonna change the dates of these hearings.
Duran's defense team has filed for immunity, arguing he followed his training and was acting in self-defense. An immunity hearing is set for early August. Fortson's mother says the uncertainty is frightening.
I'm so scared. I don't know what to do. I pray. I pray because I don't know.
Many in the community have offered support to the Fortson family, and many plan to show up in 3 weeks for the immunity hearing. Fortson's mother says she's just asking for accountability.
I'm not sitting here asking for his life. I want you to give my baby the respect that he earned. And whatever else they do with him, that's between him, the judge, and the prosecutor. But I just need you to say, I went to the wrong apartment. He was in his house. If anybody would stand your ground, it would have been him.
Dacian Smith, Fox.
The criminal charge against Eddie Duran was only one part of the legal battle over Roger Fortson's death. In May 2025, Roger's mother, Chantameki Mecca Fortson, filed a federal civil rights and wrongful death lawsuit. It named Duran, Sheriff Eric Aden, and parties connected to the Shea Elon apartment complex. The lawsuit alleged that Roger's constitutional rights had been violated. It accused Duran of using excessive force and claimed the sheriff's office had failed in its training and supervision. It also challenged how uncertain information from the apartment complex was reported before deputies reached Roger's door. But the case did not continue against every defendant. In August 2025, a federal judge dismissed the negligence claims against the apartment complex and one employee. The court found that Florida law protected the reporting of suspected criminal activity under the circumstances. That ruling did not decide whether Duran's use of force was lawful. It also did not end the separate claims against Duran and Sheriff Aden. Those issues remained part of the civil case. For Roger's family, the legal fight unfolded alongside another loss. Only months after Roger was killed, his 16-year-old brother, Andre Fortson, was also fatally shot in Atlanta. Andre's death was separate from Roger's case, but the grief was now doubled. One son had been killed inside his Florida apartment. Then another was lost before the family had reached the end of Roger's legal battle. Mecca Fortson was no longer carrying the loss of one son while asking the courts for answers. She was carrying two. Roger Fortson was not on a battlefield. He was not under arrest. He was not the subject of a criminal investigation. He was inside his own apartment, speaking to his girlfriend, when an unverified report brought an armed deputy to his front door. Roger opened that door holding a legally owned handgun at his side. The weapon was pointed down. The shots came first. The order to drop the gun came afterward. That sequence is why Roger must be remembered as more than the armed man described in the first official statement. He was a son, a brother, an airman, and a 23-year-old man who was home when 5 shots ended his life. Share this story so the full record is not buried beneath that first description. Subscribe for the immunity ruling and any trial developments in Eddie Duran's case. This is Dark Trace Crime Stories, where we follow the evidence beyond the first headline.